You open this door with the key of reason. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of truth, a dimension of freedom, a dimension of joy. You're moving into the land of both the ideal and the real, of the possible and the actual. You've just crossed over into the Capitalist Corner.
Where reason meets reality, welcome to the Capitalist Corner.
Welcome to the Capitalist Corner Weekend Edition. I am your host, Michael Liebowitz, and here with us once again is the wonderful, amazing Dr. Mommy, Megan Ribbens. Megan, welcome back.
Oh, thank you. Although, as we were saying off air, and I feel like I need to say this to the audience, Michael is on my temporary S list for making me research John Dewey. I said, I don't know where you live, but I think you should sleep on the couch tonight. I'm in a mood.
Yes. Well, you already put it. So we're going to discuss John Dewey. John Dewey was a highly influential American philosopher, psychologist, and educational reformer, famous pragmatist. We're here to discuss his views on education. So, Megan, you read 600 and something pages of this guy this week. Summarize for us, would you please, his views on education?
Okay. All right. So what I did was first of all, I copied a whole bunch of quotes, and we're just going to go through a few of them. And I realized that quotations do not a person's idea make. So what I suggest is that I send you all the quotations I have, which again, 650 pages is a small fraction of what John Dewey wrote. Sorry, is this supposed to be family friendly, or can I actually say what I'm thinking?
Be yourself, Megan, please.
Okay, so this man loved to hear himself mental masturbate, and he put it all down on paper. So yeah, 650 pages is a very small fraction of his bibliography. Nonetheless, I think what I've selected for quotations to actually read are representative, and I will include more in the show notes if Persephone wants to put it on the blog, so you can validate that for yourself. And I've included links because I think everything he wrote is in the public domain. For instance, you can go to Project Gutenberg and read it all for yourself.
Okay, so just so you know, I've already sent Persephone to share for the reading, the stuff that I read. So his views on morality in education, his book on experience in education, and multiple AI assessments of his work.
Yes.
Persephone is already
yes.
sharing.
There is more. Okay, so let me back up and motivate this discussion, mostly for myself, because I'd rather just go be in a corner feeling sorry for myself right now. So why should anyone else listen to me complain about this man? Well, as you said, he is what is regarded as the father of modern education. It's ironic because every time I say the name John Dewey, people are like, wait, like the Dewey Decimal System? I'm like, no, that's a different person.
Is it?
Yeah, yes.
I thought that was John Dewey.
No, different person. It has nothing to do with being a librarian. No, he was just the father of modern United States education, and we are all poor from it. So he's kind of known as advancing the idea of learning by doing, which has a very positive connotation. For example, you might conflate what he's saying with what Gracie and I do on our YouTube channel and on Patreon, where we actually walk through the history of biology. And by walk through, I mean actually do the landmark experiments that, fundamentally changed and evolved the way we think about living things. That is not at all what Dewey is saying. And what he thinks is, I just want to put a trigger warning for any objectivists listening, because you're going to hear a lot of trigger words. So I want to make clear what the father of the United States education system did and what he thought, because I don't think it's what people think he thought. So, as you said, I read over 650 pages of his in the last week, and I just want to break it down first into some statistics. So, in all of that reading, the number of supporting evidence he gives, the number of times he gives an example of something he experienced, 0. None at all, right? And you're like, that can't possibly be true. He does give examples like a child burning themselves on a flame or a hot stove. He actually gives that example a lot, like a disturbing number of times, at least 5 in his book. Where is it? Democracy and Education: An Introduction to the Philosophy of Education. So he gives up these sort of made up examples. He has entire made up conversations in his publications, but he never says, I believe this because of this real world evidence. Not once. And that you're going to see is very typical. And he has some very derogatory things to say about empirical data as such. And I have some of those quotations, so brace yourself. He does have one example of something someone else saw, right? Like someone who is like learning to
The swimming thing?
yeah, where they were like learning to swim by verbal instruction, and someone asked him, well, how did that work out when he actually got into the water? He's like, I sunk. But that wasn't even like his own experience. It was an anecdote he heard from someone else. That is what I mean to illustrate that, like, this guy was just in his own castle in the sky. He just made up ideas and, connected them together, and never, even though he taught in a classroom, he and his wife both taught in like a teaching lab, he never brings any of those examples into the reading, at least the writing that I read, because, empirical data are worthless in his mind. So let's just kind of get a word count of, just to kind of get a sense of what he thought was important. So of the pages I read, the word social or socially or society comes up almost 900 times. He uses those words. Whereas individual, individualism, individuality comes up about half that much, like 478 times. So a really good example is his it's like a small book, Moral Principles in Education. It's 58 pages. And in that book, social comes up 117 times, individual comes up 12. So the individual, in terms of the morality of education, has no relevance for him. And let me tell you something, every time the word ego or individual is referenced in his writing, it is as a pejorative. You don't have to take my word for it. Please torture yourself and read some of his writing. No, I don't hate people as much as John Dewey does. I wouldn't actually recommend that. So I didn't actually know this until last week. He wrote his dissertation on Kant. Yes, I promised you trigger words for objectivism. Here is the big one, Kant, the 4-letter word that every objectivist hates. That comes up in the writing I read 31 times. Always, very, very praiseworthy. Socrates comes up 16 times. Plato, of course, 40 times. Rousseau, at least 18. I didn't do a full count, but he has a lot. He sort of uses Rousseau as a polemic, but like a very loving polemic. Take that for what it's worth. Aristotle actually 37 times. Montessori twice. So he certainly knew that Montessori existed, and he didn't do as much to kind of denigrate Montessori in the United States as his intellectual successor, Kilpatrick. But they really tried to create this sort of boys' club that excluded the Montessori method from the United States, which is why it's much more popular in places like not even Italy so much as India, as I understand.
China too, Dewey had quite the impact, right?
That I don't
I
know.
believe so.
Anyway, so to give a kind of summary of what Dewey thought, he was a pragmatist, which
Yes.
means that he he didn't think there were principles. He thought you just kind of did whatever and hoped that it worked. And if it worked, you did it again. And if it didn't
Right.
work, you tried something else. Now, that's not a lot to go on, right?
No.
Doesn't give you any advice about what worked actually means, right? It doesn't have like a
No.
standard. And he was very much against standards as such. He even spends a few chapters in one of his books talking about how there shouldn't be aims. He calls them aims instead of principles or goals. Although he does use those words, he talks about aims in education. And we'll get to those quotations a little bit later.
So hold on one second. I just want to ask you something. And I forgot to tell the audience: super chats, super stickers, greatly
Yeah, I'm not gonna
appreciated.
lie. I feel like I am like due for a big karmic reward, and by karmic reward I mean excuse me, super chats, super stickers, and also if you want to tip me on Patreon, it would be much appreciated.
Yes. So Megan, correct me if I'm wrong. So this is what I see is Dewey's thing. He was very critical of classical education, and I'm not saying that some of those critiques weren't leveled correctly, that there weren't good critiques. It's his solutions that I really have the issue with. But nevertheless, so he hated sort of instruction based learning where a teacher would give lectures, hand out reading assignments, that sort of thing. He thought that not only was school meant to prepare you for future democratic living. He was big on he wants to train the kids to live in democratic society, be democratic citizens, but that the school is actually part of democratic life. What was another sort of big thing. And everything, all learning, he said, is ultimately social. He even says that mathematics are social. It's a social learning experience. That its only value is socially, right? So I want to just and your point about if it works is the pragmatists teach basically that you don't start with concepts, you don't start with principles that you then apply to experience. It's that everything is a hypothesis. This action might work, and then you try it out, and if it works, there you go. It's good. So they say that truth is what works. It's not something you discover and store. It's just something that you find through your various actions. Does that sound like a correct assessment to you?
It is. I'm actually gonna break down the pragmatism from the materialism, from the sort of anti-goal oriented approach, the determinism, and the anti-individualism. Yes, ultimately, if you wanted to distill John Dewey down to one quotation, it would probably be, oh, let me find it here. Quote, apart from participation in social life, the school has no moral end nor aim. Um, Indeed, he really didn't think that human beings had any purpose except as they function in society and as they perpetuate it. He thought the reason education is necessary is to perpetuate the society. Let me see if I've got a good quotation of it. Okay, so that quotation I gave you was from Moral Principles in Education from the book Democracy in Education: An Introduction to Philosophy of Education. He says it over and over again. Here's a good one. Actually, there's an entire chapter 2, Education as a Social Function. But let's just grab something else here. Quote: it is consequently futile to set up even the ulterior development of faculties of observation, memory, etc., unless we have first determined what sort of subject matter, We wish the pupil to become expert in observing and recalling, and for what purpose. And it is only repeating in another form what has already been said to declare that the criterion here must be social. Here's another one. Quote, education is a social function, securing direction and development in the immature through the participation in the life of the group to which they are to belong, unquote.
So, Megan, at its base, it seems like his idea, both in philosophy and education, is anti-conceptual. What Ayn Rand called the focuses on the concrete-based mentality, that everything is focused on the concretes, not conceptual learning, not learning principles. It's an epistemology that's just tied directly to concretes. It's an assault on the minds of the children, ultimately, because you're not teaching them to think properly.
Yeah, and I think even that might be too generous. For example, in the book How We Think, he first of all, he in the first couple of paragraphs, he says that observing the concretes is not thinking. That doesn't count. And you might be generous and say that that's sense perception, right? That's what happens before conceptualization. But I think there and elsewhere, what he makes clear is that there isn't thinking, right? There's essentially just aping. Now he talks about how, in his better moments, he talks about, attaching meaning to things by connecting things with other things. But he says really explicitly in the essay Consciousness and Experience, quote, the main positions of the paper, the revival of a naturalistic realism, the denial of the existence of quote unquote consciousness, end of quote. Yeah, I think it's probably too generous to say he was concrete bound. I think it's much more accurate to say that he was anti-epistemology and anti-knowledge. Here's another little gem in case you needed more ammunition. From the book Democracy and Education, an Introduction to the Philosophy of Education, quote, epistemology starts from the assumption that certain conditions lie back of knowledge, unquote. Essentially, he's saying epistemology and knowledge are impossible. And he actually makes that more explicit later in that chapter, because he's agreeing with Kant, right? He calls himself a neo-Kantian and says that knowledge is impossible, right? I forget exactly how he phrases it, but he's essentially saying that that it was like conception without concretes is, vacuous or something like that, and concretes without sensation without conception is just brutish. Or I'm totally butchering the quotation. And you might say, well, yeah, you can't be conscious without being conscious of something yes. In the world. That I don't think is what he or Kant were saying. They were saying that in order to say that knowledge is impossible.
I don't want to go too far down the Kantian rabbit hole. Kant
can't imagine why.
Yes, no, but I don't know. I didn't read all the stuff you read on Dewey, but what I will say is, from what I have read, it seems abundantly clear to me that his idea of knowledge is not of having concepts that correspond to reality. It's all about you're just enmeshed in concretes, and that's it. It seems that when it comes to epistemology, he's very, very concrete bound, and his view of human beings is a very collectivist one, and he thinks that children are only going to learn by doing. But if you're learning by doing and it's in the absence of understanding principle, then there's no way for the kids ultimately to even apply what they've learned.
Yeah.
And
he wants application of knowledge. He says it only counts as knowledge if you can successfully act on it. But what he's talking about is really just an ape going through the motions. that's what he regards as true knowledge.
Okay, elaborate on that a little bit, Megan. An ape going through. What'd you say? An ape going through the what?
Going through the motions.
Going through the motions. Yeah, I'm just picturing this ape.
It's really dehumanizing, among other things. Let's see. The best I can do probably is just offer a few quotations. So early on in his book, Democracy in Education, an Introductory to the Philosophy of Education, he makes a lot of, I mean, if you want to call these examples, they're sort of made up examples along these lines. Quote, if a rat is put in a maze and finds food only by making a given number of terms in a given sequence, his activity is gradually modified till he habitually takes that course rather than another when he is hungry. Human actions are modified in a like fashion, unquote. Let me keep going. Actually, one second. I have more.
More booze or more quotes?
Yes. Okay, quote. He not merely acts in a way agreeing with the actions of others, but in so acting, the same ideas and emotions are aroused in him that animate others. Because we're all just reflections of each other. Sorry, that was me editorializing. Continuing the quotation. A tribe, let us say, is warlike. The successes for which it strives, the achievements upon which it sets store, are connected with fighting and victory, unquote. So he's using this to kind of illustrate that he wants to create education as an environment of an ideal society in which to inculcate a perpetuation of that ideal society. Here's another one. Quote, it would probably be admitted with little hesitation that a child gets the idea of, say, a hat by using it as other persons do, by covering the head with it, giving it to others to wear, having it put on by others when going out, etc. But it may be asked how this principle of shared activity applies to getting through speech or reading the idea of, say, a Greek helmet, where no direct use of any kind enters in. What shared activity is there in learning from books about the discovery of America, unquote. So that's where his idea of, you can't really understand the discovery of America unless you have some activity, right? And you can't really, you can maybe analogize between a Greek helmet and the hat that you put on and off, but you can't actually conceptualize a hat without putting it on and off. And that's what's so insidious about him, is that for some concepts, particularly of human-made objects, right, the concept involves its use to humans, right? Like, you can't understand a table until you understand that it's a place where humans sit and gather and maybe eat. But you certainly, like, he would extend that to say you can't understand the concept of a mountain unless you've climbed it, right? It's only in relation to your immediate activity that you can understand anything, and that's not true, right? The mountain would exist even if you didn't climb it, and you could certainly make a conception of a mountain without ever having climbed a mountain.
Sure.
But Dewey, he completely disagrees.
So hold on one second. So Dink Smallwood 42 says, I'm poor, but dang, you guys more than earn this. It's
I'm not going to disagree.
SEK 20. I don't know what SEKs are, but thank you.
Buckle up. It's going to get worse.
Well, so like your point about the mountain. Now, obviously, so like I'm looking over here and I have this, right? This is a winter hat. It doesn't look the same as a baseball cap, but I could understand that both are hats without actually wearing this. For one thing, I could see other people wearing it and I can learn that way. That's, social learning theory from what's Albert Bandura is all about how humans learn from watching other people. But also in the case of a mountain, I could see a mountain on TV. I could see one in person. Now, it's true, I would learn more about the mountain if I climbed it. But I also wouldn't be learning things by climbing it that I could learn. Say I was to read somebody who had done soil tests on that mountain. They would know different things than what I would. So I don't know, when he's saying you don't know unless you've done it, there's different aspects and different things that you could know about. Some things, it's true, you can only learn by experience. I can't, for instance, tell you how a rose smells, right? You would have to actually smell the rose to understand it. It doesn't mean you can't identify what a rose is. It doesn't mean you can't understand that you don't want to prick your finger on the thorn of a rose.
He actually uses the example of a rose, and he says that it doesn't count as knowledge until you actually pick. And he would hate that I would say it this way, but I'm not wrong. Like, you not only do you not understand the concept of rose until you pick it and bring it to your face, and probably get pricked by its thorns, but that you would have to do that for every single plant. Right? Like, every time you saw something that was vaguely red shaped and had like a green stem and smelled vaguely pleasant, right? Like, you'd have to pick it and bring it to your face and bleed on its thorns before you could say, oh yeah, this is a rose too. That's what I mean by pragmatism. It's like, no. There's nothing. There's really nothing you can glean from past experience or, principles. That's not a thing.
Yeah. Now, his impact, I mean, when I was, Googling him and reading about him, I think it was Claude actually said it would be difficult to maybe it was Grok, I don't know, but maybe it said it would be difficult to overstate the impact that he's had on American education, or education in general even. My question for you, obviously you think that it's a negative impact. What would now you're a scientist, right? If you were to form a hypothesis, knowing what you know about human nature, knowing what you know about children, how they learn, you're also you're a mother, Dr. Mommy, what would you hypothesize would be the effects of schools adopting the theories of John Dewey?
The effects would be that teachers and students more and more would wish they were drugged or dead.
Okay, that's kind of an extreme assessment. Florida Nick has given us 99 cents. Thank you so much, Florida Nick one. So what I'm really, because obviously his ideas have taken hold and have been around for quite some time, right? We're still breathing. We're still able to do this show. There's still inventions. People have still overcome it, even though going through it. But what would be the effects once you get to, say, 25, you've had nothing but progressive education. What would you hypothesize would be the effects on that person in terms of forming concepts, in terms of thinking long term, of being able to plan for the future, of understanding themselves as individuals rather than parts as a collective?
I mean, John Dewey, I would say if you were completely consistent with John Dewey, which I think is almost impossible to do, it would be that if it was completely consistent with John Dewey, such a person would have probably done stuff like built molecular models out of toothpicks and marshmallows with no idea what molecules or models were, right? They would have done some very concrete activities that connected to nothing and meant nothing. So they might be very facile at putting together toothpicks and marshmallows and very little else. So in general, they wouldn't be able to connect what they see in their own lives with what is true more generally. They would have a hard time discerning what was true or false, except maybe whether it's internally consistent or not. So, for example, it'd be very plausible. I should say, really, any conspiracy fantasy would be very plausible as long as it was internally consistent, even if it really has no bearing on anything in the physical world. I think at some level they would know that all of their skills were not applicable, and all of the applications would have no real understanding. I think they would feel very afraid, very unprepared, and very angry with their immediate society, namely the other kids around them.
Megan,
right?
you went to public school, right?
I did.
Okay, so did I, but I really didn't pay attention. So I'm just wondering, as you're reading Dewey, are you recognizing things in what he's advocating that you experienced in school yourself?
Yes. But it's interesting that much like we know quotations from philosophers like know thyself, even though we don't necessarily know anything about Socrates, there are attitudes that are very, very prevalent and unquestioned that come from Dewey that most people don't realize come from Dewey. So, for example, the idea that one of the primary goals of primary and secondary education is socialization. I hear that over and over again. And I love what Leonard Peikoff had to say about it. Is like throwing a bunch of 5-year-olds into a room expecting them to teach each other socialization is like expecting 5-year-olds to teach each other table manners. It's not going to happen. And what makes it so much worse is that at some level, I think most kids know that they're trying to prepare for adult life, and that this is not doing that. And they're fearful and angry and resentful with no way to articulate that that's the expectation and that they know it is not coming close. So, several episodes ago in The Rational Egoist, I was asking Mark Pellegrino about 13 Reasons Why, because it's all about high school students committing violence against themselves and against each other, but it, like as mean as kids are to each other. And I actually found 13 Reasons Why a pretty typical snapshot of my experience in high school. There's not really an attempt to explain why they're so awful to each other, except this one line where the main character who has committed suicide is talking about going through a college fair. And she's like, we spend 12 years being told where to sit, what to think, when to pee, which is literally true in US public education. And then we're expected to make one of the biggest decisions of our lives, what we're going to do after high school, whether that's go to work, where to go to work, go to college, what to study, where to go. You know what I mean? Imagine that, right? 12 years being told absolutely everything and being less than prepared, like having very little concrete knowledge, no connection between concrete facts such as they exist, and having just to ape these activities that have no relevance and are meaningless, and then being said, okay, you're 18 now, you're ready, go figure out what you're going to do with the rest of your life. You know what I mean? I found that line so powerful, especially in the context of that show. So you're asking me what I think the effect of John Dewey is, and I stand by what I said at the beginning. Wishing you were drugged or dead.
So do you think that he got anything right? Like, did he say or write anything that would be good in your view?
Um, Only in so much as to make it more insidious, because it makes everything he said more plausible, right? The idea of learning by doing, again, like if you're being benevolent, you think, yeah, it's it's one thing to read an experiment. It's another to have to actually, gather up the materials and wash the glassware and figure out what happens when you don't wash the glassware well enough. Well, you don't get as efficient a reaction, right? Like, it's there is some plausibility to being first-handed. Um, but again, that's not at all what he means. And the fact that he's sort of smuggling in ape behavior for um, a first-handed inductive education is probably the most insidious thing. And again, like, not all of the quotations I pulled out are bad or objectionable. The vast majority are, but I have a lot of sympathy for people who kind of don't know very much about John Dewey and haven't read a lot of his work, thinking, oh yeah, this is fine. It is not fine. None of it is fine. It's awful.
Now I asked you what your hypothesis would be, but there has to have been empirical studies, at least according to what I've seen. What are the actual results of? Matter of fact, let me just read this to you, and you can tell me what this stuff means here. Let me make sure I get this right. Okay, so it says here. This is from Claude. Decades of educational research done by people like E.D. Hirsch, Diane Ravitch, have demonstrated that content knowledge, the structured accumulation Dewey devalued, is a stronger predictor of reading comprehension, critical thinking, and academic success than process-oriented skills taught in isolation. So that's like one of the main things, and they're saying here that that's just Dewey was wrong. Can you explain that a little bit? What I just read. If you need me to read it again, I will.
No, it's I mean, it's kind of what we've been saying throughout this whole series, is that I think I don't agree with E.D. Hirsch on everything, and I haven't read Diane Ravitch, so take that for what it's worth. But this cannot be overstated. You cannot think without something to think about, right? You can't just go through the method of thinking. You have to have content. But content alone is not thinking, right? There's such a thing as sensation and perception, and that's different from isolating what the correlates are and forming a concept, right? You can see red things and black things and soft things and hard things. And it's not until you recognize that these are hats, beanies, and baseball caps, and helmets, and fedoras, right, that you've made a concept. So you need both. You need content and method. I think E.D. Hirsch thinks that you can rescue public education with content. I do not agree. But I think the fact that John Dewey, and I just found another quotation that I have to give you here. Oh God, actually, no, this has more to do with the goal of education. Never mind. Yeah, so it's funny because, like, I thought the worst sin of John Dewey was that he really just wanted students to go through motions, and that would somehow lead to knowledge. And I don't think that's true. And this has to kind of, it sort of parallels my thinking throughout this series about how government education cannot work. And my first thought was that it has to have as little concrete content as possible. And I stand by that. But I think the bigger problem is that it can't have a coherent goal. And it turns out that John Dewey was explicitly against a coherent goal. And I've got a couple of quotations that sort of illustrate that. Quote, it is consequently futile to set up even the ulterior development of faculties of observation, memory, etc., unless we first determined, oh, sorry, I did actually read this. I'll just read it again. Why not? First determine the sort of subject matter we wish the pupil to become expert in observing and recalling for what purpose, and is only repeating in another form what has already been said to declare that the criterion here must be social. There was another one that just drove me up a wall. They all drive me up a wall. What am I saying? Oh, here's a good one. You were asking about my hypothesis. So he actually wrote a article on Darwin and the effect of the origin of species on philosophy. I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. I am so excited. He obviously does not understand what Darwin was trying to say at all. I actually left that quotation out where it illustrates that he's a total nincompoop. But anyway, so here's what he has to say about science that like grinds my gears. Quote, what a plurality of hypotheses does for the scientific investigator, a plurality of stated aims may do for the instructor, unquote. He's like saying that an instructor should have multiple conflicting goals. Totally cool. In a sense, this quotation is true. If you're just kind of making crap up, right, and you call those hypotheses, your outcomes as a scientist are probably going to be about the same as if you're an instructor with multiple, even contradictory goals. Garbage. Garbage.
Garbage from John Dewey. Okay, how about this, Megan? This says that this is downstream of Dewey, but it included it. Constructivist and discovery-based pedagogies have consistently underperformed explicit sequenced instruction in controlled studies, particularly for foundational skills in reading and mathematics.
I mean, big shock. What's interesting is that he actually takes three historical examples of different approaches to education. And the selection itself is worth pausing on. But I want to kind of summarize what he had to say about these three educational periods. The first was Plato, both his approach to society and to education. And what he said about Plato was that Plato was great, except that there were only three classes, right? There was sort of the plebe, like I'm summarizing Plato a little haphazardly, but essentially was saying there was like the worker bee, there was the warrior, and there was the philosopher king. And for Dewey, there was just not enough plurality there. He needed more classes. Leaving aside Dionysius II and all of the, usurpations and assassinations and more usurpations, I guess in John Dewey's mind, the results of Platonism, totally cool. Just needs more classes. And then he talks about he uses quotation marks, the individualistic ideal of the 18th century. And he's saying that because the 18th century resulted in so much cosmopolitanism, it actually wasn't individualistic. So the outcome justifies the fact that, because, individualism is an anathema to him. It's all about the society. And because the society experienced so much increase in knowledge and flourishing and cosmopolitanism, it actually wasn't individualistic. True story. So the fact that we were focused on subject matter and content, bad. It was just purely by accident that all this flourishing happened. And then his last example is late 19th century, early 20th century German education. And I have to read, it's a very long quotation, so brace yourself, but I have to read it in its entirety. Keep in mind, this quotation is from a book published in 1916, in the middle of World War One. Now, I don't know that much about World War One because I was educated in the United States. Here's what I know pretty well. It started with some random Latvian prince getting assassinated, and Germany used that as an excuse for a land grab to try to get more territory from France, because why not?
This is
that
his
were
quote now. This is
no, no, no,
him
no, no.
saying-
This is me spitballing.
So
a
you're
little
talking
bit.
about Archduke Ferdinand's assassination?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, the although the sort of perspective of World War One for me mostly comes from this book Hidden Powers, which is about Lisa Meitner, the woman who discovered nuclear fission.
Okay.
Anyway, okay, so here's what he had to say about German education. Sorry, late 19th century, early 20th century German education. Except that it's too nationalistic. It's not internationalistic. I should say that. Okay. Hang on. Quote, so far as Europe was concerned, the historic situation identified the movement for a state-supported education with a nationalistic movement in political life, a fact of incalculable significance for subsequent movements. Under the influence of German thought in particular, education became a civic function, and the civic function was identified with the realization of the ideal of the national state. The state was substituted for humanity. Cosmopolitanism gave way to nationalism. To form the citizen, not the man, became the aim of education. The historic situation to which reference is made is the after effects of the Napoleonic conquest, especially in Germany. The German states felt, and subsequent events demonstrate the correctness of this belief, that systematic attention to education was the best means of recovering and maintaining their political integrity and power. Externally, they were weak and divided. Under the leadership of Prussian statesmen, they made their condition and stimulus to the development of an extensive and thoroughly grounded system of public education. This change in practice necessarily brought about a change in theory. The individualistic theory receded into the background. The state furnished not only the instrumentalities of public education, but also its goals. When the actual practice of such that the school system from the elementary grades through the university faculties supplied the patriotic citizen and soldier and the future state official and administrator and furnished the means for military, industrial, and political defense and expansion, it was impossible for the theory not to emphasize the aim for social efficiency. And if there is said to be any aims in end quote. If there's said to be any aims in education, John Dewey is explicit that it should be social efficiency. Now, again, let that implode in your mind for a second. He is hailing the German system of education where they apparently appropriated away all private institutions of learning so that it could all be public government. It could all be nationalistic and prepare people for society of a military, industrial, and political defense and expansion. And World War I happened, where they tried to grab land from France and were devastated. When this was published, this was going on. And John Dewey, rather than say, wow, I am completely wrong about anything, I'm going to shut the hell up and rethink my life, kept going and kept publishing works for decades. There are more evil people in history, but not many.
Okay. So the last finding, according to Claude, is that the progressive erosion of coherent curriculum in American schools, traceable substantially to Dewey's influence, correlates historically with declining depth of cultural, and you're going to love this, and scientific literacy.
Yeah, that part is like the least surprising. Like I said, like the whole part of the reason I've been so dedicated to creating an inductive curriculum in biology and advocating for the emancipation of education is because I see it in my own profession. I see, people in all positions of biotech companies espousing ideas which are just anti-scientific. Stop me if I've given you this example before, but I was at like a big cap company, like over $1 billion in market capitalization, and we were doing a sort of company science fair.
What did you say? A big what company?
Big cap,
Cap?
so like, yeah, so
Oh,
like,
I thought you said a big cab company. And I'm
oh
like, where the
no,
hell are we going with this?
yeah, I don't know. No, market cap. So the not the CEO, but the person directly underneath the CEO. I don't remember what his title was. But he was essentially the number 2 of this ginormous company. He's watching one of 12 talks given by the entire company, and the talk was about how we wanted to fix this problem, so we're just gonna monkey around with the amino acids. It didn't work. I'm like, that's not science. We have dozens of lots, each with dozens of different observations. We could actually look for a correlation between what we want to see and any number of these observations. We could then make a hypothesis that one of these observations that correlates with what we want is causally related. We could then test that by isolating variables. And that is exactly not what they did. Shockingly, it didn't work. And I'm looking over at this person who's making stupendous amount of money and like really high up in this big company. I'm like, how are you not seeing what I'm seeing? How are you being like, oh yeah, that's totally science what you did. You just made something up, tried it, and it didn't work. So yeah, it's alarming that even a lot of scientists don't really know what science is and therefore can't leverage it for, their own benefit or, I don't know, the improvement of the human condition. Thank you, John Dewey.
Okay, so before I wrap up, I'm going to give you a chance now. Now, you said I'm on your shit list, although temporary, because you had to read all this stuff about John Dewey. So now I'm going to give you an opportunity to get it off your chest. Tell us what you think of John Dewey. Give us Dr. Mommy's summary of how she feels about Mr. Dewey.
Honestly, my biggest disappointment is that anyone ever listened to this man. I just don't get that, right? He's saying that empirical data don't matter, right? Like, we definitely shouldn't have goals. We should just try stuff until it works. Whatever your definition of work is, definitions, we don't need them. Doesn't matter. Why was he listened to? He's a verbose nincompoop who just couldn't shut up and certainly couldn't, reflect. There was one quotation of his that I thought was hilarious. He's like, if we don't, I'm sorry, it's here somewhere and I just can't even, at this point, I just can't even read any more of his quotations. He's essentially saying, if we don't, reflect on the outcomes of our actions, we're being dumb. I was like, really, John? Really? Yeah, that is what I think of him.
All right, Megan. So where can people find you? Other than here every Saturday.
Anywhere that Dewey is not. You can find me on YouTube. We've got some good playlists. The newest one, the one I'm adding continuously to, is the inductive history of biology. And it's not just a history. It's not just a biology class. You actually get to learn by doing, not as John Dewey said, like an ape, but as a human being, you get to, we walk you through these experiments, how to build the equipment to do the experiments. You build microscopes and magnifying glasses and breed fruit flies and mix chemicals together. It's fabulous. So that is at youtube.com/MARIBBENS, Ribbens. You can also tip us because damn, this week at patreon.com/Dr. Mommy, no period, just Dr. Mommy. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I would definitely appreciate a booze fund.
Awesome. Megan, thank you so much for everything you do. We will be back here again next week for more on education on Capitalist Corner Weekend. Thank you, audience. Thank you for participating, for super chats, super stickers. We will see you next week here, and hopefully I'll see you Monday on the Capitalist Corner as well. Until then, please remember to check your premises.